Everybody. Today we're going to be going into our World War II lecture video notes on the campaign in Africa. Some of the people, the who's, the what's, who's involved, and how it all kind of played out. All right, so here we go. Here's the first slide of the notes that we're going to be talking about. I'm going to be flipping kind of a little bit between this website and this PowerPoint, so kind of bear with me here. Let's see here. It's loading. All right, so a couple things for this. Really, there's three main military generals that we're going to be talking about during the course of this lecture today. All three of these guys were, we'll say, the cream of the crop in terms of the generals during World War II. Very well respected for each of their countries. So we'll start with going from left to right. This is General George Patton, arguably one of the greatest generals in U.S. history, highly decorated. His nickname was Old Blood and Guts. He was the kind of general that would be, frontline, kind of thought outside the box, very well respected even amongst his enemies, and feared because his tactics were unconventional. He was very aggressive compared to a lot of other generals, and he was unpredictable. Just kind of a little story about him. He was very, very old school, no nonsense kind of guy. And, one of the things about him is that there was one soldier in one of the battles that he was in who had PTSD, kind of in shell shock, kind of sitting in the corner and crying and didn't want to go back. And Patton came up to him and punched him right in the face. And he did get in trouble for that. But it just kind of shows that, look at the kind of guy he was. But yeah, he will be one of the top U.S. generals in Northern Africa. Beginning part of the war. When you get, as we start moving throughout the course of the war, you'll start seeing them more involvement in Europe at the Battle of the Bulge and Bastogne. But we'll talk about that later on. Then you have Bernard Montgomery. He was a British general. He will make his also nickname is the Monty. This is where he's going to lead a lot of the British military in Northern Africa. Again, very, very well respected, top of the line, probably one of the greatest British generals during the war. And then you have Erwin Rommel, known as the Desert Fox. He'll be the top German general in World War II. He'll be a part of the Africa Corps, which is German forces in Northern Africa, and he will be tasked with cutting into the Allied supply line into the Middle East. And I'll show you a picture of that here in a minute. All right, so here we go. All right, so Northern Africa. So you see this map? I know it's kind of hard to see. I'm going to zoom this in a little bit. Well, can't do that. All right, so anyway, you see up here, this green space in Northern Africa right here where my cursor is at, that is all territory that once belonged to the Axis power. So actually, so as you can see by the map here, Axis powers, Germany, Italy, Japan, look at what they control. They control almost all of Europe. They control the most north, central and northwestern part of Africa, a huge chunk of land and huge chunk to defend. That's the problem. Whereas the Allied power still had control of Egypt. Now, why is Egypt important? Because if you look at the map here, this pink area, this is all oil here. And in order to fight in World War II, you need oil to fuel your planes, to fuel your ships, to fuel your vehicles, all things you need. So this was a very important part for the Axis powers here. They wanted to break into Egypt so they can get access and cut off the Allied supply of oil. If you cut off their oil, you cut off their ability to fight a war. So that's why in the Northern Africa campaign, this is where Italy and Germany is going to be very strategic and try and overtake Egypt, overtake this area here in the Middle East. If you do that, you cut off oil. So the Battle of El Alamein, this is July through October of 1942. This was a battle in Egypt where Italy and German forces are going to be attacking, and they'll meet right at El Alamein here. You can see that kind of right and through there where my cursor's at, pretty close to Cairo. This is where the German general Rommel, the Desert Fox, and Bernard Montgomery are going to be going at it in strategy. With their tanks are going to play a major part in this in World War II. Whereas in World War I, tanks didn't play a major role, but it played some. So as I talked about, the Germans have a long, weak supply line. So they have to defend all this area here. They have to defend all this area here. That's a huge supply line they have to defend, and they have to supply the troops with reinforcements. That's going to be a problem. And the one thing the Allies have in favor, the British, have in their favor that the U.S. is going to be coming here shortly to come in and help them out with Patton. So this will be the turning point in North Africa. The Allies are going to stop the Axis invasion in Egypt. So they're going to hold the line, and we'll talk more about that here in a little bit. All right, so what is that called? It's called Operation Torch. This was the operation that was conducted in Northern Africa. Allies start here because they don't have enough troops to fill a European invasion yet. So I'm going to go back up here, back to the original thing. So they're looking at this big map of Europe here. So what do you do? The problem is the U.S. really isn't mobilized yet. Pearl Harbor happened. We're in the war. We're doing some things over in the Pacific, but we're not really at this point playing a major presence right here. So basically you can see them by the map. Great Britain's by themselves. They don't have enough soldiers to launch an invasion into Europe. Okay, so where do you start? They felt like if you start an invasion down here in Northern Africa, where won't take quite as many soldiers, you can at least have a base of operation. So that's why they choose there. They believe it's important for them to save the oil fields, save the Suez Canal, supply the Allies, and get the oil that is needed. And they're waiting for General George Patton and the Americans to come in and reinforce the British army to help them out, fight against the Germans and the Italians. And one of the major themes throughout the Northern Africa campaign and Operation Torch is going to be tanks. A lot of tank battles. Why? Because it's desert, it's hot, and the tanks are going to be able to move faster. And at this point in World War II, the tanks are a lot faster. They're a lot more technologically advanced to what they were in World War I. So who's involved here in Operation Torch? You have the U.S. and the British, and you have the German and the Italians. Afrika Korps was the name of the German group. It was led by Rommel, as I talked about earlier. So you see this map down here. You see the Americans are going to come in and they're going to invade the West, the British over here on the East in Egypt, and the Nazis are in the middle. And you're going to be seeing the Americans coming through this way, trying to invade. It's basically like a sandwich. The same thing I said before with the alliances. You have to basically try and split Nazi forces up. So the battles in Northern Africa are going to be bloody, but the main objective here is to save the oil fields. Don't let them be taken by the Germans. That's so you cannot retreat at any cost. Allies are going to defeat the Axis powers in Africa. Axis powers are going to lose about 100,000 men. 250,000 are going to surrender. U.S. are going to lose about 18,000 soldiers. This is going to be a big win against the Germans, and will boost our morale as we first enter the war. So where do you go from there? So now we'll go back to the map here. So this map is as of 1942. So as of 1942, we regain all this land. This all turns red. All right, so we have our base of operation now. So what do? Now you have to go in through and invade Italy, which is a part of the Axis powers. This will be our base of invasion. We'll invade from the south. We call it Operation Husky. The invasion of Sicily, Operation of Italy is called Operation Husky. So you have Torch is Africa, Husky is Italy. Excuse me. So the Allies invade Sicily in July of 43. You got Patton and Montgomery that are a part of this invasion. And what's kind of odd about this is that when we invade Italy, the civilians are going to help us. The civilians of Italy, they're going to start attacking German soldiers. Now, why is that? Because by 1943, this is when Mussolini starts losing power. The economy is awful. They start losing some battles, as you've seen in Africa. They're losing. And basically people start to turn on Mussolini, and he's a marked man. So the civilians went out of the war. So they're going to help the Allies out, start attacking the Germans. Both sides, when they're fighting throughout Italy, they're going to damage priceless art and architecture. As you guys know, Italy and Rome, all these famous cities are architectural havens for art. They're going to be destroyed. As Hitler and Goering are retreating from Germany, they're going to steal a lot of the priceless art in Italy. They call it the rape of Europa, the spoils of war. They're going to start stealing a bunch of the art and collections for themselves. The Allies are going to establish monuments and fine art groups to help protect the historical cultural importance of Italy. Long story short, Sicily is going to be taken about 2 months. So from there, you move on to the mainland of Italy. So we move to Salerno, which is, you can see it right here, right there. So 1943, the next Allied advance into Italy with General Clark in command of U.S. forces. Germans almost win, but Hitler decides that defense in Italy below Rome is not a priority. So this is when Hitler's going to start retreating a lot and pulling a lot of his soldiers out of Italy. Basically say, telling you got to take care of it yourself. We're going to retreat up to the north and start worrying about our Austrian borders and start pulling troops in into like where D-Day is going to be and to the Eastern Front as well. So this is where the Tuskegee Airmen. This is an American group that we'll talk more about in U.S. history. But this is a first African American combat group during World War II. Many African Americans at this point were desegregated. So this was a highly decorated group that fought a lot in Italy. They fought against the Luftwaffe, which is the German Air Force. All right, so invasion of Italy. Mussolini is going to ask Hitler for more help. Hitler only agrees in order to hold Allies off from invading Germany. So initially, Hitler's plan was to start pulling troops away. Mussolini's begging and pleading with him to provide more soldiers. So he reluctantly does, because ultimately, if you keep the Americans south, away from the German-Austrian border, the better off you're going to be. Eventually, it takes about 1.5 years for the Allies to get to Rome. So this proves that invading Germany from the south will take too long. So that means they have to invade Normandy, which will be D-Day. So it gets from the bottom tip of Italy all the way through the middle of Rome, about 1.5 years. So they can't invade Germany that way. It's going to take way too long. It's very mountainous. It's going to take too long. So that's when they start putting up the plans, start with the D-Day invasion, which we'll talk more about later. So here's the fall of Mussolini. Here's Mussolini and his wife were both hung, and their bodies were strung throughout throughout Italy. Italians lost confidence in him. He was stripped of his powers. He was arrested in 1943. Hitler gets him out and restores his power. But as Germany falls in 1945, Mussolini tries to escape to Spain, but he's arrested. So Benito and his girlfriend and other fascists are executed, and they're hung in the streets. Their bodies that get stoned. So when Hitler sees this, his buddy, the guy who he looked up to, basically being stoned to death in the street, that's when he realizes he cannot get captured alive. All right. So I'm going to kind of skip to this really quick with the last 2 minutes we have, kind of just showing you how the battles in Africa went. So again, all this land here is Allies. All of this green is Axis power. So look, watch the map. So they launched the invasion at first, and then the Allies start pushing back right to there. So that's as February of 1941. So that's what happens next. The Germans launch another counterattack. They basically push back the line to where it originally started, just about. So they're making some gains. You can kind of read through this if you really are really interested. With Rommel's tanks, they slice through Al-Ghara. British start retreating. Now that's what happens now. Got another. It's December 41. So this is February and May. Oh, they get really close. So they push the line further to Al Alamein. They're close. So this is when the Americans are going to start coming in. Americans land. Start attacking. British with Montgomery. And there it goes. So you kind of see how that worked. For a long time, it's just for the first about a year or so of the war, year or two in Africa, it's basically just the British against the Germans and Italians. Once the Americans come in, that starts a sandwich, and that's what basically, the end of it. It ends the involvement. All right, so there we go. Thank you so much.